My hometown of St. Louis has the highest murder rate in the entire country. And the murder rate there is the highest it's been in 50 years. Yet the mayor wants to defund the police. Senate candidate and Missouri Attorney General Eric Schmitt joins us to talk about this absolutely insane idea. Good afternoon to you, sir. Welcome. Welcome to the program. Good to see you.
It's good to be with you.
I was looking at this, and I hate reporting bad news about my hometown. I love Missouri, I love St. Louis, and I know this isn't just St. Louis either. I know this is Kansas City. In fact, I was looking at Quentin Lucas, the mayor of Kansas City, and he was saying that our plan does not seek to defund, it seeks collaboration. But when you are not just with Kansas City, but also St. Louis, when you're talking about taking a bunch of money from one entity, and this is money that taxpayers agree upon, that they're going to give the police, members of their community, to protect and serve, when you're moving that amount of money away from one entity and moving it to somewhere else, that's pretty much the definition of defunding. What is your take on this, and what is this supposed to do to help crime?
Well, it's not going to do anything to help crime. It's going to exacerbate an already dangerous situation in St. Louis and Kansas City. That St. Louis saw a 50-year high in murders last year, even with population declining. So those are just raw numbers. And then Kansas City saw an all-time high in 2020. And so this is exactly the wrong time to be defunding the police. But that's exactly what's happening. This isn't rhetoric anymore. This is reality, and it's in the heartland. You've got progressive mayors in St. Louis and Kansas City moving to defund the police. You've got Congresswoman Cori Bush celebrating this on Twitter, saying that, we shouldn't be investing in policing at all, and celebrating the fact that St. Louis was defunding the police with this budget move. And so these bills and these maneuvers are moving their way through both of those city halls, and it's incredibly dangerous and reckless. It's going to make our law enforcement officers less safe, and it's going to make our communities less safe. Law enforcement officers and victims deserve better.
Yeah, and I can't help but think, looking at this, from a responsible fiscal angle, where are the taxpayers that get to have a say in this? I mean, you have the state legislature, Democrats proposing this in the state legislature, but this is something that voters, when I lived in St. Louis, these were things that we voted upon. We would determine how much money we were going to be willing to have taken from us via taxation by government and allocated to X, Y, and Z. So what are residents getting as a return of their investment for this? Their tax dollars are supposed to go towards people that are protecting and serving, and not to some of this other stuff that's been proposed that has nothing to do with any of that.
Well, I'll tell you how this is sort of completely tone deaf. In North City, as you know, Dana, is predominantly African American. Those wards are the most African American in the St. Louis city. They voted by the highest percentage for increased police funding just a few years ago. So this just doesn't match in St. Louis. It just doesn't, match up with where the people are at. Also a disconnect. Last year, the legislature came in and said, look, we're going to get rid of this archaic rule in St. Louis City that you can only recruit police officers who live in St. Louis City. St. Louis City is about 300,000 people of a region of about 3 million. And so the legislature said, look, we're going to get rid of that archaic rule. We're going to trump, the local ordinance there so that you can recruit officers from outside the city limits, because they're about 150 officers short. So what does this mayor do now? Well, she's slashing millions from the budget and eliminating 100 positions. So again, this is completely wrong-headed. It's opposite of what we need right now, which is we need more law enforcement on the ground. We need our communities to be safe. Otherwise, the consequences, I fear, are going to be very dire.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I just go back to that night where it was actually more than a night. This was maybe about almost a year ago, not quite. It was during last summer when you had retired police captain David Dorn, who was murdered outside of Lee's Pawn and Jewelry. And there were fires, there was looting, there was arson, all because of rioting. And I remember so many of those individuals, after they were detained, after police did their job, they were protecting the neighborhood, protecting businesses, many minority-owned businesses, I might add. Those people were all released. Most of them didn't even face charges. Those who did got wrist slaps. And so how, with deterrence so low and enforcement not backed up with judicial muscle, what does that say to criminals? How is that a deterrent to criminal activity at all?
Well, they've been emboldened. Criminals have been emboldened because you've got a prosecutor in St. Louis and in Kansas City, quite frankly, that aren't very much interested in prosecuting violent crime, and that we know that. And so one of the things that we've done, our office, we don't have original jurisdiction for state crimes, typically unless we're asked to come in. And that happens a lot in some rural communities. So our special prosecution unit will go in and handle those cases, but we don't get asked in those urban communities. So one thing that we did, my office was the first office in the country to partner with federal prosecutors through our Safer Streets initiative. And so we are working with federal prosecutors to prosecute things like carjackings, assault of police officers. So we've got about 500 charges to date, but that only goes so far. I'll bring another example. When President Trump last year, instituted Operation Legend. Legend was a young boy from Kansas City who was shot and killed in his bedroom in Kansas City. So the whole operation was named after a young Missouri boy. And our office, because of that partnership, we're right there working side by side with federal prosecutors as they designated, I think it was about 10 cities. Well, St. Louis and Kansas City were two of those cities. So you had a federal law enforcement surge of folks like from the FBI working to, pick criminals up off of the streets and making those arrests. And so it shouldn't have to take that kind of effort from President Trump like it did last year. And so what have we learned from that? Well, we need more law enforcement on the ground. So what's actually happening now? Well, in St. Louis and Kansas City, they're moving to defund the police. It makes no sense whatsoever. And like I said, it's incredibly dangerous and reckless.
It hasn't been polling well either. Just noting the way that it's been received by a lot of people in the Democrat base and a lot of people who are urban voters. They're like, wait a second, hold up. We want to make sure that our streets are safe, that our kids can go outside and play without having to worry about repeat offenders out there raising Cain. No, it's tough, and we see this not just in Missouri but all over the rest of the country. One last quick question for you, because obviously, you're running for Senate, you're a declared candidate. This is one of the things that you're walking right into. This is a huge issue with increasing crime across the country. How does one even begin to start addressing that? I mean, my perspective is it's always been a judicial more so than an enforcement issue, because we have very lenient sentencing. And, some of the things we increase to felony penalty, but they're misdemeanors. And then some of the things that are felonies, it's like we wrist slap over. How do you even begin to alter that so that takes effect and we actually can have a balanced law and order approach?
Well, I think you're right, Dana. So one thing we did last year in the legislature, carjacking actually wasn't a crime. There was all kinds of ways people could charge it, from simple tampering to stealing. So we made carjacking a crime. We lobbied in the legislature to make carjacking specifically a crime. And that if you use a deadly weapon for a carjacking, you're going to go to jail for 10 years to life. That's how serious that crime is. It's a violation of people's rights. Certainly, people are scarred from that if they survive it. And so I think, a careful look at state laws and what we can do better. Also, I think, the partnerships I mentioned, working with federal prosecutors, one thing that we're doing. The other thing, too, is this is a cultural issue, too. You're right. So some of this has been on the judicial end. We never thought that there would be sort of an enforcement, piece to this, because the conversation of defunding the police was never even really discussed until just a few years ago. So it's incredibly dangerous. But I think culturally we need to make sure that we're acknowledging the hard work and the dangerous work that our men and women of law enforcement do. In our office, we have something called the Back the Blue Award, where we go around the state, and it could be something like a law enforcement officer helping a kid with a lemonade stand raise money for charity. We acknowledge that. Also, if like in Chesterfield, where two officers went well above the call of duty and rescued somebody from a burning vehicle, we acknowledge that too. So I think it's, all of us have a role to play in making sure they know how appreciated they are. But you're seeing across the country, and St. Louis and Kansas City are no different, early retirements and people who aren't even going into law enforcement now. Somebody asked me a few weeks ago, what's the thing that keeps you up at night as Attorney General? And my response was, the brave men and women who may not go into law enforcement in the future. We know about the retirements now, but what about the people who never go to the police academy? And so I think that it's high time we recognize the important work that they do and make sure they know they're appreciated.
There you go. I would agree with that.